So welcome to this second video for Raw Umber Studios, and in this session I'm going to be talking about Bargue drawing. What I mean by Bargue drawing is the practice of producing accurate copies from a 19th century drawing manual by a French artist and educator called Charles Bargue. The plates are contained in a large hardback drawing manual like this, which can be purchased online, and you can also easily search the web to find reproductions of the plates that are contained within the book. The book begins with a number of simple drawing exercises which are based around facial features such as eyes, noses and mouths, and moves on to intermediate and much more complex drawings as the course progresses. The book was used widely in the 19th century European academies, and artists as varied as Van Gogh and Picasso at the early points in their careers also did copies from the Bargue book. So a brief recap on the materials that you'll need. This is covered in more detail in my earlier video. But you'll be producing the drawing in graphite, so that can either be a traditional wooden graphite pencil or a mechanical propelling pencil. If you're using a wooden pencil, you'll need a means to sharpen that, so that'll mean a craft knife and some sandpaper. You will need a means of affixing your Bargue drawing and paper side by side, so that will be masking tape and a drawing board. For corrections, you can either use a putty rubber, a traditional plastic eraser, or if you want to spend a little bit more money, you can purchase these narrow propelling erasers or even an electric eraser. You'll also need a couple of measuring tools, so that will be a skewer or a narrow stick. In this case, this is a bicycle spoke, a plumb line, simply a weight with a line attached to it. Some people use just a key with some string attached to it. This is a decorator's plumb line with fishing line attached, and a mirror or a reflective surface of some kind. This is a black mirror, which is quite useful, but an ordinary standard glass mirror will be fine as well. So I'm now going to show you how to set up the Bargue drawing ready for copying. As you can see, I've just taken a plain piece of drawing paper and placed that on a vertical drawing board attached to an easel. And as you can see, I've just neatly taped the corners with masking tape like so to provide a nice drawing surface. Whether you purchase the Bargue book in hard copy format or download images from the internet of the plates, one thing that you will notice is that they typically show two stages of the drawing process. Now, as you can see, this first image shows quite a rudimentary block-in style of the drawing, and then the second image for this particular plate shows the finished drawing itself. Now, what I recommend for the purposes of copying the Bargue drawings is to use the block-in as a guide for you initially. As you become more experienced, you may want to dispense with the block-in, or rather depart from the methodology that is used by the author of the book and devise your own way of blocking in the image. But to begin with, it's a very good starting point just to use the guidelines that are provided in the book itself. And so what I'm going to do is simply take the block-in drawing and place that directly next to my drawing paper. And I'm just, again, taping that at the corners. And what I would then do is to similarly take the more developed, the finished drawing and place that further away. The idea is that I want to have the image that I'm referring to most closely initially, in this case that being the block-in drawing, And I want to have that as close as possible to my drawing paper so that my eye doesn't have such a distance to traverse in making measurements and getting the drawing set up. Since I've printed the two images on separate pieces of paper, once I have established this drawing as accurately as possible, I can then simply take the two pieces of paper and swap them over, and then I'll have the finished drawing just here next door to my drawing paper, and I can use that to refer to the values at the edges, the gradations and transitions that are contained in this final drawing. So to get your Bargue drawing underway, we need to just briefly touch on some measuring techniques, enabling you to establish the drawing that you're copying onto your drawing paper. These first marks are really important and will provide the foundation for all subsequent observations that you make in producing your copy. Some teachers will recommend taking measurements working actually at the drawing surface, so taking a straight edge and placing it against the features that you're trying to transpose across onto your drawing paper. I wouldn't recommend taking that approach, and the reason for that is that as you develop your drawing abilities, you will want to work from three-dimensional objects where taking those kind of one-for-one measurements are simply not an option because you're working on a rounded object occupying space. So what I recommend doing is taking a couple of steps away from your drawing surface and holding up your measuring tool. In this case, I'm using my straight skewer or stick, and holding it against the features that you want to transpose across onto your drawing paper. So you can do that with verticals and horizontals, just simply moving the skewer as you need to. You can also use the plumb line to take vertical alignments as shown, and you can move your plumb line left or right and see how various features, for example, the eye in this case, you can see how that might align with the chin and so on. And what you're aiming to do is to produce a one-for-one copy using the initial block-in here on the right as your guide. Once you have transposed across all of those lines and got them as accurate as you can in terms of their length and their inclination, in other words, how steep they are, you should have a complete copy of this initial block-in drawing. At that stage, you can then swap the drawings over so that the reference that you're referring to is the final image, and you can start working on values. And the way that I suggest doing that is beginning with the very darkest darks, so these very deep blacks that are contained within the shadow of the neck, the position of the nostril, for example, and the eye socket. Once you have got those established to the appropriate level of darkness, you can then move on to adjacent tones, say, for example, the slightly lighter tones in the forehead here, these striations in the cheek and around the muzzle, and gradually move outwards towards the lights. My final piece of advice for you is that throughout the drawing process, you need to keep your eye fully engaged in terms of spotting inaccuracies in your copying. What you will tend to find is that as you add the values and the drawing becomes closer and closer to the rendered final version of the Bargue plate, you will start to notice areas where your initial block-in was inaccurate. And what I want to encourage you to do above all else is wherever you see inaccuracies developing as the drawing goes along, simply grasp the nettle and make those changes. It's really, really important to do that rather than simply relying on your initial observations and just assuming that those are correct. What can very easily happen if you do that is that you end up with a fully rendered drawing that simply doesn't match in terms of the structure and overall proportions that you're aiming to achieve. So that rounds up this quick video on Bargue drawing. The book provides an excellent resource for students in the early part of their training, and I really encourage you to try out 3 or 4 of the drawings, perhaps a couple of simpler ones and some of the more complex ones. Remember to keep your pencil sharp and keep your eye engaged throughout the process and make corrections wherever you see them to try to produce as accurately as possible the Bargue plate that you're trying to copy. Thanks for watching, and keep an eye on Raw Umber Studios page for future tutorials and videos.